evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Sorry, I'm going to just turn off my, I don't know why this is, sorry. It's wonderful to be back in Boston. As Vijayji mentioned, I'm from here, but I want to thank first the Vedanta Study Circle of Boston and the Lhasa Foundation and Purnima and Vijayji and everybody else involved in the organization of the event. Thank you all for attending today. And thank you to the musical group for the beautiful bhajans as well. So it's a beautiful way to start the entire program. Thank you so much. So I thought since I grew up here, I thought it'd be appropriate to start with an anecdote that took place not far away from here. A couple of years ago, I was invited to give a guest lecture in a graduate seminar at Boston College, in a comparative religion seminar. And I was happy to do that. I was invited by a very prominent professor, a Catholic professor. And that went off quite well in the morning. And then she said, in the afternoon, she's teaching an introduction to Hinduism class. And she said, you can sit in if you'd like, and I'll introduce you. And I said, sure, that sounds interesting. It was at the very beginning of a semester, so this would have been the first class in this semester-long introduction to Hinduism. And so I came in the afternoon, and the professor got up, had a PowerPoint, and the first slide had the famous passage from the Purusha Sukta about the world depicted as a human body and so on, in the four varnas, the four castes. And she began, the way she began to explain Hinduism was to say that Hinduism is based on the caste system. These are her opening words. This is the way that she's introducing Hinduism to a group full of impressionable undergraduate students from all majors, because this is Boston College and it's kind of a mandatory, it's part of their curriculum. And I was just astonished. And then I protested and I said, and she started explaining, this is the hereditary caste system, it's the result, it's the cause of so many social ills, this or that. And I said, yeah, this hereditary caste system is definitely not good. It's something that should be abolished. But to claim that Hinduism is based on the hereditary caste system is nonsense. And I mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, because in the Bhagavad Gita you find Bhagavan Krishna defining caste, varna, very clearly as based on guna and karma. Chaturvarnyam mahasrishtam guna karma vibhagashaha. In many places. Guna and karma. Guna means your innate qualities. Karma means your behavior. That's it. That's varna. So I said that. They weren't pleased. And then chimed in the teaching assistant. The professor's teaching assistant was, I believe, an Asian Christian teaching assistant doing his PhD under her. And he had just spent several years in India working with the Dalits. And his entire PhD thesis was on Dalit theology, and then he became very animated and upset. And we got in this heated debate, and he was saying, no, there's still a lot of exploitation. I said, yeah, I'm sure there is exploitation. I'm not defending that, but what I'm saying is that this hereditary caste system is not essential to Hinduism. That's a degeneration. That is not fundamental to Hinduism. And it was very entertaining for the undergraduates who were there. It was like a Wimbledon match, and they were kind of looking back and forth. It was all very amusing, but also very telling. This is just one incident of many that I can tell you. You know, another thing I'll tell you, I'm a Hindu chaplain at two universities near our ashrama in Hollywood. One is the University of Southern California, and the other is UCLA. So I talk to a lot of young students, and many of them have told me. I'll just give you an example of one young woman in her 20s. She told me, you know, Maharaj, when people ask me my religion, I'm afraid to say I'm Hindu, or I'm embarrassed to say I'm Hindu, or I'm ashamed to say I'm Hindu. There's this fear, there's a pervasive fear to just say that you're a Hindu now. This is the world we're living in now. It's so sad. I see this time and again. And I said, why? Why don't you proudly say that you're a Hindu? She said, well, they're going to say that I'm a fascist, that I support Trump, this kind of thing. So there's this kind of facile, mistaken equation of Hinduism with Hindu fascism, right-wing Hindutva and this and that. These are all serious mistakes. Hinduism is a wonderful treasure. And the purpose of this talk today is to discuss with you, to explore with you, the core spiritual principles of Hinduism, okay? But let me begin by mentioning a few things. First of all, if you look at, I already mentioned an incident from academia, but at all levels you're going to find that Hinduism is portrayed in the worst possible light. It's very troubling to me. From the K through 12 curriculum, mainstream media, look at the way that the mainstream media covered the Pahalgam massacre. That itself was an atrocity. The fact that they covered it in that way, not mentioning that most of the tourists were Hindu, not mentioning that the ones who killed the tourists were Islamist terrorists. There's a very strange thing going on these days, and this bias runs very deep, and I have no idea why that's the case, and that's worth looking into. So in general, people have wrong ideas about Hinduism, and they've often caricatured Hinduism in terms of the 3 Ps and the 3 Cs. Do you guys know the 3 Ps and the 3 Cs? The 3 Ps are poverty, pollution, and polytheism. And the 3 Cs, caste, curry, and cows. This is Hinduism to most people, even to some Hindus, so-called Hindus, unfortunately. And the saddest thing is some so-called Hindus are also propagating the same kind of ideas about the Purusha Suktam. Hinduism is based on the caste system. One Hindu organization, quote-unquote Hindu organization, invited me to engage in a discussion with them. And one of the leaders in that organization started trotting out the same arguments that this Catholic professor at BC did. And she called herself Hindu. So it's just very strange. We're living in a strange world. Now, I want to mention my own upbringing a little bit here. I grew up in Lexington, as Vijayji mentioned, at least most of my childhood. Before that, brief periods in Braintree and then Burlington, actually, until the age of 6. And then I moved to Lexington. And I would say that I was raised culturally Hindu. I was raised as a kind of cultural Hindu. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. I'm sure this will resonate, especially with some young people out there who might understand this. But many of your parents too, so you'll know. What does it mean to be Hindu? Well, what I understood from growing up here in Boston was it meant going to puja a few times a year, Saraswati Puja, for instance, Durga Puja. These are the big ones for Bengalis. I'm Bengali. So there's a big Pravashi Bengali organization, so I was involved in that. So I'd go to the pujas. I would walk inside. There would be an image, and somebody would be waving a lamp, the pujari, and a lot of Sanskrit mantras, and I had no idea what was going on. Nobody explained anything to me. On Saraswati Day, of course, I was told to bring my textbooks. So bring the textbooks, put them at Ma Saraswati's feet, and by magic, I'll get the best grades in the class and whatever. So all this seemed very quaint and weird, superstitious to me. So what did I do? I didn't sit in the puja because I had no idea what the importance of any of this was. So I came outside and played football with my friends. And the parents of one of my good friends whom I played football with might be here, actually, Gopamashi, one of the... So I played football. I had a lot of fun. I was the wide receiver usually. And then I went in for the khichdi, the lunch prasad, and then I came out again. So none of that inspired me because there was nobody there to explain the spiritual significance of what was happening. And so I'm telling you, because many of you are parents, Hindu parents, you have an obligation, you have a duty to explain our great religion, this priceless treasure to your children in the right way. And don't just drag them to puja, explain puja to them. Explain the spiritual principles of Hinduism to them. This is extremely important. But that was just slightly on the critical side, but there are some wonderful things I learned from the Bengali community I grew up in. I was taken to Bengali school on Sundays, and I'm still very grateful for that. From age 6 to about age 12, I learned reading and writing Bengali, a bit about Indian history, Bengali literature, and so on. And it's because of that Bengali school, and one of my teachers, I believe, is sitting here now, Bengali school teachers, that I can read Sri Ramakrishna's teachings in the original Bengali, Holy Mother Sharada Devi's teachings in the original Bengali, Swami Medhananda's beautiful Bengali poems and letters. It's a wonderful treasure that these teachers of mine gave me. At the time, I didn't think much of it. And now I see the beauty of it, and that Sri Ramakrishna was orchestrating everything from the beginning. So anyway, and another thing I'll mention, My mother would do puja twice a day, every single day, without fail, in our own house. She had a little shrine for as long as I can remember. And again, at the time, I didn't think much of it. She also didn't, force me to sit with her or anything like that. She gave me my own freedom. But I noticed that. And, now looking back, of course, I'm really touched by that. And I realize that must have had some impact on me. And it shows her own dedication and her own bhakti, her devotion. So there was that as well. And she must have been doing a lot of praying, because I ended up as a monk. I don't know how many of you who grew up with me expected me to become a monk, but here I am. Anyway, so what happened? As a result of being raised as a cultural Hindu, where there was nobody in the Hindu community to explain to me the spiritual underpinnings of Hinduism, I was turned off by the whole thing. I was also a budding philosopher, critical thinker, and this whole idea of being, quote-unquote, born into a religion, that never really resonated with me. What does it mean to be born into a religion? Just because I happen to be born in Afghanistan, then I'll be a Muslim. If I'm born in the US, I'll be a Christian. This is weird. If religion is true, then prove that it's true. It doesn't make any sense to just be, and it's the same kind of thing in politics. There are places where certain states are red states, other states are blue states. This is all very weird. You should be believing in things on principle, not because you're born into a certain place or into a certain family. That was my idea from an early age. So what happened as a result? I became an agnostic. So I became an agnostic fairly early on. I don't remember when. It's difficult to date these things, but maybe as early as middle school, definitely by high school. And I would call myself a kind of agnostic spiritual seeker at that time. And then I went to Berkeley for college and at Oxford, and then I started searching more deeply, looking more deeply into the world's religions. I started studying the Bible, parts of the Quran, Dhammapada, and the Bhagavad Gita. That was the first Hindu scripture that I read that really gripped me, that really inspired me. And I started to understand on my own. I mean, I just did this. This was through self-study. I started to appreciate the deeper spiritual principles of Hinduism. And I said, wow, this is the religion that I belong to. Or maybe that I belong. I was still agnostic, so I hadn't fully accepted it yet, but I was starting to appreciate the spiritual treasures in this religion, which nobody really explained to me growing up. Much later, I discovered that there were some great Hindu figures who taught these spiritual principles, like Swami Vivekananda. Of course, all of you know that in 1893 he came to Chicago. He's one of the first representatives of Hinduism, and he came and he gave this rousing speech, Sisters and Brothers of America, and the second speech he gave was called A Paper on Hinduism. It's a very deep and profound explanation of spiritual Hinduism, and I recommend that to anybody who hasn't read it. And Sri Aurobindo, this is probably less widely known. He wrote a book called A Defense of Indian Culture, Sri Aurobindo. And he has a little section of 3 to 4 pages where he explains what Hinduism is, and he explains it in terms of some core spiritual principles. I strongly recommend that you look at this. And for you nerds out there who want a more in-depth treatment of spiritual Hinduism, I would recommend a book which I can probably guarantee 98% of you have never heard of. This is a book written by a philosopher who's now passed away. His name is Satish Chandra Chatterjee. Satish Chandra Chatterjee. The book is called Fundamentals of Hinduism. It's a wonderful book, actually. So, for Hindu parents out there, educate yourselves. You need to educate yourselves about what spiritual Hinduism is so that then you can explain that to your children. Our future is our children, actually. But first you have to educate yourselves, then you can educate your children, okay? So read those works by Swami Vivekananda, by Sri Aurobindo, Satish Chandra Chatterjee, and also try to practice it, of course, in your own life. That's the most fundamental thing. And then your kids will watch, and they'll notice, and they'll start to appreciate what Hinduism really is. Hinduism, the term Hindu. The term Hindu, of course, is a relatively recent one. The Persians used to refer to people who lived on the other side of the Indus River as Sindhus, and then that Sindhu became Hindu. So some people, when I give this kind of talk, I've given this talk, versions of the talk in other places, sometimes some Hindus will say, don't use the word Hindu. The word is tainted. We should use other words. Let's use Sanatana Dharma, this, that. First of all, if you say Sanatana Dharma, almost nobody's going to understand what you're saying, other than people who are already in the know. So how helpful is that when you're trying to explain your religion to other people, number one. But number two, just because some people mischaracterize or misrepresent Hinduism, why should we abandon the term? Let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. And to support this point, let me quote something Swami Medhananda said long back in the 1890s. He said, "We are Hindus. I do not use the word Hindu in any bad sense at all, nor do I agree with those that think there is any bad meaning in it. In old times, it simply meant people who lived on the other side of the Indus. A good many among those who hate us may have put a bad interpretation upon it, but names are nothing." This is the attitude. It's a healthy, mature attitude. The word Hinduism is already current. Let's use it and let's explain it properly. Let's understand it properly and then explain it properly. That's what I'd like to do today. So, the main thesis of this talk, the title of the talk, A Tale of Two Hinduisms. What are the two Hinduisms? I've already kind of hinted at it. We have cultural Hinduism on the one hand, and we have spiritual Hinduism on the other. And we can make exactly the same distinction with respect to every world religion. There's going to be cultural Islam, there's going to be spiritual Islam. There's cultural Christianity, there's spiritual Christianity. There's cultural Buddhism, there's spiritual Buddhism, and so on and so forth, okay? It applies to all religions. What you're going to find in every religion is that the majority of people who identify with that religion tend to be in it for social or cultural reasons. You'll just find this. They like to feel a sense of belonging, a sense of community. You hang out with other people that are like you. You meet your future spouse that way. There are all sorts of things, reasons for doing that, but that doesn't fall under the spiritual category. That falls under the social or cultural category, okay? And then in every religion, including Hinduism, you're going to find a small minority of people who are sincere spiritual aspirants. Bhagavan Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, "Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhe yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mam vyati tatvataha," which means among hundreds of thousands of people, only a tiny minority of them seek perfection. That's true across the board in every religion. This is a fact. Let's not pretend that in Hinduism that the ratio is any better. The percentages are, no, it's the same. 98%, something like that, more fall on the cultural, social side, 2% spiritual side. Let's try to increase the percentage of the spiritual side. That's going to be what I'm going to try to argue today. But let's first try to understand what is cultural Hinduism and then what is spiritual Hinduism, the deeper spiritual Hinduism, the true spiritual Hinduism. First of all, cultural Hinduism. I already explained it. Swami Medhananda was scathing about cultural Hinduism. He said, religion has moved into the kitchen. He said this in 1890s, British colonial India. People were so obsessed with, don't eat this, don't touch this, don't do that, don't touch that person. That's all that religion is. Even now, one important aspect of cultural Hinduism are things like, don't eat beef, as if this is the be-all, end-all in religion. And why we're putting cows on a pedestal, and chicken is fine, fish is okay, but no, cows, we don't, no, those are in a different category. Weird things. Oh, another thing, when I first moved to India, I was lectured by a Swami who said, why do you write with your left hand? It's not right. I'm a lefty. So, cultural Hinduism. This, no, you shouldn't write with your left hand. It's a sin, some nonsense. It's weird. These are all weird things. So none of that falls under spiritual Hinduism. Okay. So what is spiritual Hinduism? Spiritual Hinduism is the true ancient Hinduism, the Sanatana Dharma. The term Sanatana Dharma is a wonderful term. I have nothing against it. I love the term. The problem is it's very difficult to universalize that because it's too many syllables and it's for people who don't know Sanskrit. Sri Aurobindo, in an amazing letter written in 1910, which I'm guessing most of you are not familiar with. If you want to look it up, it's in the complete works of Sri Aurobindo, Volume 1, page 551. early cultural writings. He explains very beautifully and powerfully these two different kinds of Hinduism, spiritual Hinduism and cultural Hinduism. He doesn't use the terms, these are my terms, but you'll see in a second. So let me read out to you a passage from this 1910 letter written by Sri Aurobindo. He says, he wrote it to his brother, Biden. There are two Hinduisms. One, which takes its stand on the kitchen and seeks its paradise by cleaning the body, cultural Hinduism. Another, which seeks God, not through the cooking pot and the social convention, but in the soul, spiritual Hinduism. The latter is also Hinduism, and it is a good deal older and more enduring than the other. It is the Hinduism of Bhishma and Sri Krishna, of Shankara and Chaitanya, the Hinduism which exceeds Hindustan. I like that phrase also. Hinduism is not an ethnic religion. We'll get to that later. Was from old and will be forever, because it grows eternally through the eons. Its watchword is not kriya, but karma, not shastra, but jnana, not achar, but bhakti. Yet, it accepts kriya, shastra, and achar not as, this is not achar in the Bengali sense of pickle, this is achar as mechanical rituals. Okay. Yet it accepts kriya, shastra, and achar not as ends to be followed for their own sake, but as means to perfect karma, jnanam, and bhakti. Very, very profound paragraph here. It takes a little bit of unpacking. These Sanskrit terms at the end, let's try to understand them. So, if a lot of you are techies out there, so you'll know, in computer science, there are trees. I took one computer science class at Berkeley before I switched my major, so I'm using that knowledge. So there are trees, right? Okay, so the tree here is cultural Hinduism and spiritual Hinduism. So let's talk about cultural Hinduism first. Cultural Hinduism involves kriya. What does he mean by kriya? I see it as mechanical, lifeless rituals, just going through the motions, repeating mantras you don't understand, waving lamps, you don't know what's the significance of it, like that. What I thought my upbringing was like. Shastra, scriptures. Shastras are very holy. Bhagavad Gita, Upanishad, they're not criticizing the Shastras here. But this kind of fundamentalism about the scriptures and treating it, just reciting the verses as somehow that'll give you liberation on its own, this kind of thing. This kind of Vedic fundamentalism. I think that's what's meant by Shastra here, okay. And then achara. Achara means what? Not pickles, observances. Observances like what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, how you should dress, this and that, what hand you should be using for different things, and so on. What's pure, what's impure, uchishta, these concepts. Now, that's cultural Hinduism. Kriya, Shastra, Achara. Now, on the other side of the tree, we have spiritual Hinduism. In spiritual Hinduism, Kriya gets transformed into karma. What does Sri Aurobindo mean by that? Karma here means spiritual practice. You're not just doing the puja or waving a lamp mechanically for its own sake. You're doing it to purify the mind and as a way to worship God. If you can do that, that kriya becomes karma yoga. It becomes a very powerful spiritual practice. What about scriptures? In spiritual Hinduism, scriptures are not ends in themselves, they're means to the end of God realization. They're means to the end of self-realization. So then we avoid this scriptural fundamentalism. The purpose of scripture, the purpose of studying scripture is to realize God. We always have to remember that that's a means to the end of God realization. And then achara. All of these observances about food and purity and impurity, what's the purpose? I'm not saying that we shouldn't observe these things, but you have to understand the deeper significance of it. There's some feedback, I think. Is that okay? Or you can just check. But anyway. So Bhagavad Gita, for instance, distinguishes three kinds of food based on the three gunas. There's sattvic food, there's rajasic food, there's tamasic food, and so on. These fall under observances. These are not the be-all, end-all in religion, but they can help. So in spiritual life, you have to understand yourself, but you also have to understand what is the deeper purpose behind all these observances. The deeper purpose is trying to make ourselves as sattvic as possible. That's the idea. So food is one factor among many, and there are much more important things than food. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, If a person eats pork, and in Hinduism pork is considered very unholy. If a person eats pork, but his mind is concentrated on God, that person is far more spiritually evolved than the strictest vegetarian who eats nothing but havishanna and who is thinking about worldly things. So what does it mean? He's not saying that food is completely unimportant. He means it's not the main thing in spiritual life. It can help you. It can be one help among others, but the fundamentals are different. Renunciation of lust and greed, kama kanchana, that's far more important in spiritual life. Renunciation of selfishness and egoism, far more important. Far better to be an unselfish meat eater than a selfish vegetarian. Okay, so that's the point. Achara. Achara becomes a means to attain bhakti in spiritual Hinduism. Instead of achara, we understand the deeper spiritual meaning of all these observances, to make ourselves as sattvic as possible and to develop bhakti, to develop devotion toward God. If we keep in mind these core principles of spiritual Hinduism, we can continue to engage in these observances without becoming fanatical, without becoming egoistic. Now there's new forms of ego cropping up. There's so many forms of spiritual egoism. And one form is the ego of a vegetarian. And then there's worse, the ego of a vegan, which is one level further. Not that there's anything wrong, it's great to be vegan. But there's an ego that develops sometimes, not always. We have to be very careful. Where ego can creep in, it's very dangerous, especially in spiritual life. Don't think that because you've taken a spiritual life that, oh, now I'm free from ego. Nonsense. Some of the most egoistic people I've seen are so-called spiritual ones. So we all have to be very careful about that. Now, that tree again. Cultural Hinduism, spiritual Hinduism. Now I want to make a little sub-tree under that spiritual Hinduism side. Sri Aurobindo, let me read you another paragraph from the same letter where he distinguishes two kinds of spiritual Hinduism. Okay? He says, the higher and truer Hinduism is also of two kinds. So he's talking about spiritual Hinduism. Sectarian and unsectarian. Okay? So cultural Hinduism, spiritual Hinduism. Under spiritual we have sectarian spiritual Hinduism and non-sectarian spiritual Hinduism. He says sectarian and unsectarian, disruptive and synthetic. That which binds itself up in the aspect and that which seeks the all. The first, meaning sectarian spiritual Hinduism, is born of rajasic or tamasic attachment to an idea, an experience, an opinion or set of opinions, a temperament, an attitude, a particular guru, a chosen avatar. This attachment is intolerant, arrogant, proud of a little knowledge, scornful of knowledge that is not its own. It is always talking of the kusamskaras, superstitions, of others and is blind to its own. Or it says, my guru is the only guru and all others are either charlatans or inferior. Or my temperament is the right temperament, and those who do not follow my path are fools or pedants or insincere. Or my avatar is the real God himself, and all the others are only lesser revelations. Or my Ishtadevata is God, the others are only his partial manifestations. This is all sectarian spiritual Hinduism, but now he's going to explain non-sectarian spiritual Hinduism. When the soul rises higher, it follows by preference its own ideas, experiences, opinions, temperament, guru, ishta, but it does not turn an ignorant and exclusive eye upon others. There are many paths, it cries, and all lead equally to God. All men, even the sinner and the atheist, are my brothers in sadhana, and the beloved is drawing them each in his own way to the one without a second. But when the full knowledge dawns, I embrace all experiences in myself. I know all ideas to be true, all opinions useful, all experiences and attitudes, means and stages in the acquisition of universal experience and completeness. All gurus, imperfect channels or incarnations of the one and only teacher, all ishtas and avatars to be God himself. That is what Ramakrishna taught by his life and sadhana, and therefore is he the avatar of the age, the one who prepares the future of humanity. So Sri Aurobindo was strongly inspired by Sri Ramakrishna, so that's why he mentions him at the end here. So what I want to focus on in this talk today is non-sectarian spiritual Hinduism. Okay? What you'll find is, among spiritual Hindus, that small minority of spiritual Hindus, you can lump them into two categories. Even in Sri Ramakrishna's time, There were many spiritual Hindus who would come to him who were a bit fanatical about their own path. There were Shaktas, there were Vaishnavas, there were Brahmo Samaj people. The Brahmo Samaj people looked down on the worshippers of God with form. The Vaishnavas looked down on the Shaktas. The Shaktas looked down on the Vaishnavas. The Advaita Vedantins looked down on everybody other than the Advaitins. Because they believe in the personal God, and the personal God is a lower truth. This was the situation. In Sri Ramakrishna's time, it still seems to be not that much different these days, frankly. Right? All of these are spiritual people, but there's a certain kind of dogmatism, fundamentalism, sectarianism, narrowness, one-sidedness, looking down on others, this kind of attitude. This is very, very common. What did Sri Ramakrishna do? When those kinds of people would come to him, like imagine a Vaishnava. This is all in the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. A Vaishnava would come to him, he would say, it's wonderful that you worship Krishna, but never say that the highest God is Krishna alone. You like Krishna, that's your temperament. Don't put Divine Mother on a lower footing. He would tell the Shaktas, it's wonderful that you worship my mother Kali, but don't say that she's greater than Krishna. And when an Advaitin would come, he would say, it's great that you're practicing Advaita Vedanta, but don't think that bhaktas are inferior to. So he would correct them, correct their one-sidedness, okay, and make them unsectarian. Okay, so now, actually I should mention one thing. I want to mention, so what are some examples of sectarian forms of spiritual Hinduism? As I mentioned, you might be puzzled. Some of you know something about Advaita Vedanta. You say, why are you putting Advaita Vedanta in the sectarian category? Why not non-sectarian? Good question, or that might even have come up in the Q&A, so let me try to anticipate it right now. If you study Shankara's commentaries, and what I find is a lot of people talk about Advaita Vedanta without reading Shankara, and I think it's a serious mistake. It's one of the side effects of the YouTube age. They think that watching a couple of YouTube videos is enough to understand Advaita Vedanta. They're absolutely wrong about that. If you want to understand Advaita Vedanta, read Shankara. And when I say read Shankara, I don't mean Mohamudgara, which is popularly known as Bhaja Govindam. That's a beautiful bhajan, which may or may not have been composed by him. What I'm telling you to read is his commentaries on the Prasthana Traya, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra. Most people, they talk about Advaita without reading Shankara, and they end up saying all sorts of weird things about Advaita which aren't true. But if you study Shankara, and I have, what I find him saying is certain things like, he says, when he talks about ultimate reality, he says ultimate reality is only nirguna. He uses the term nirvishesha, and it means the same thing as nirguna. It means attributeless, impersonal, without any kind of qualities. Okay? It's just pure consciousness. And then in his commentary in the Brahma Sutra, he asks, well, what about the personal God, Ishvara? He says, Ishvara is that same non-dual Brahman, that nirguna Brahman, with upadhis, limiting adjuncts, like omniscience, omnipotence, and so on, creatorship. What does it mean? It means that so long as I'm worshiping a personal God, I'm suffering from ignorance. I am ignorant of my true nature as nirguna Brahman, as non-dual pure consciousness. And so he very clearly puts Shakti, or Ishvara, or the personal God, on a lower ontological footing. Ishvara only exists from the standpoint of ignorance, from the Vyavaharika standpoint, not from the ultimate standpoint, from the Paramatmika standpoint, and so on. And when it comes to spiritual practices, what does Shankaracharya say? He says only one yoga leads to the highest goal of liberation. You all know what that one yoga is. It's the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga. What about bhakti? What about karma yoga? His answer is yes, those are wonderful for inferior spiritual aspirants, manda adhikaris, who have impure minds. And the purpose of karma yoga and bhakti yoga is to purify the mind, to make you eligible to practice the higher path of knowledge. So there's all over the place in his commentaries is this talk of higher and lower, lower truth and higher truth, vyavaharika, paramatika, and so on. Okay? So that's why I put it in the sectarian category. It's for that reason. Now, for the remainder of the talk, I want to talk about non-sectarian spiritual Hinduism. You know, if your kid, many of you are parents, if your child asks you, hey mom or dad, what is Hinduism? How will you respond? Ask yourself. I'm very curious, actually. Maybe in the Q&A we can talk about it. How would you answer that question? If your 5-year-old or your 15-year-old asks you, what is Hinduism? You have to explain it succinctly. You know about kids' attention spans these days. So what would you say? Here's my suggestion. I would boil it down into 4 core principles. Okay? What are these 4 principles? And another thing I'll mention, these are not just coming out of my head. You will find each of these core principles in the great Hindu scriptures, especially in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. You'll find them all over the place. What happened is that in the course of time, different sectarian commentators, Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, there's a whole list of them. They gave sectarian interpretations of these non-sectarian scriptures. And then when Swami Medhananda came, he said, we need to reinterpret these great Vedantic scriptures in a non-sectarian light. And so Swami Medhananda himself started to do that. Sri Aurobindo has continued the project. I'm also trying to continue the project in my own way, by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna. And so I'm going to share with you what I take to be the 4 core principles of non-sectarian spiritual Hinduism, each of which you can find in the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. Number 1, these are so slogan-like that you can put them on a business card. When I first gave this talk, I said you guys should make business cards out of it, and Vijayji kindly made some business cards. You can get them at the door here with the 4 principles. Okay, so principle number 1, there is one infinite, impersonal, personal, divine reality that is called by various names and manifests in countless forms. One infinite divine, which is personal in one aspect and impersonal in another aspect. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Brahman and Shakti are non-different, like fire and its power to burn. And that same divine reality can assume many forms, the form of Ganesha and Kali and Christ and so on, and also is formless. So one infinite divine reality, both personal and impersonal, with form, without form. So is Hinduism polytheistic? This is a common question that crops up. As I said, that's one of the 3 Ps. Pollution, poverty, polytheism. Is it polytheistic? No. Is it monotheistic? Not quite. I would call it polymorphic monism. Polymorphic monism. It's a mouthful, but you can impress your friends at the next party with it. Polymorphic monism. What do I mean by that? Monism means there's one infinite divine reality. That's why it's not polytheism. There's only one. But that one infinite divine manifests in countless forms. Polymorphic. Morph means form. So poly means a lot, many. The one divine manifesting in countless forms. That's polymorphic monism. So remember that term. I think this is the most accurate way to explain spiritual Hinduism. Okay? So this is not polytheism. When he says, is Hinduism polytheistic? You say, no, it teaches a polymorphic monism. And then you can explain it beautifully. And you give them a business card. Okay. And now, if you accept polymorphic monism, you get this wonderful doctrine, which you must teach your children, and you must understand yourselves first. The doctrine of Ishtadevata. Ishtadevata. Typically, it's translated as chosen deity, but it sort of cheapens the concept. It's like Price is Right, some kind of game show, and you choose this box. No, you don't choose God. God chooses you. But it's the preferred form of the divine. The form of the divine that because of your purva janma samskaras, your past life samskaras, you feel especially drawn toward in this lifetime. You naturally feel drawn. You'll see everyone in the room might be Hindu. One might be drawn toward Shiva, another toward Kali, another toward Ganesha, and so on. That's because each Ishtadevata is different. And the beauty of it is, if you can understand polymorphic monism and this idea of Ishtadevata, you'll never put your God above anyone else's God. You know that it's all the same God. If you do put your God above it, it means you haven't understood Hinduism properly, and you're not a true Hindu in that sense, in the sense that I'm talking about. You become a sectarian Hindu again. So that's why understanding this first doctrine is so important. There's one infinite divine, which is both personal and impersonal, and who manifests in countless forms, but is also formless. Okay? Second principle. Each one of us is divine. Each one of us is intimately connected to that infinite divine mentioned in Principle 1. Each one of us are sparks of the divine fire. Now, I'm being a little bit cagey here. Why? Why do I say intimately connected? Because different traditions within Hinduism will give different explanations of what this connection is. Advaita Vedanta will say it's absolute identity. We are one with the divine as non-dual pure consciousness. But other Hindus don't agree with that. Ramanuja rejects that. Madhva rejects that. And what do they say? They say, of course, but every Hindu will say we are intimately connected to the divine. Every Hindu will say, we are not the body-mind complex. This is such a powerful doctrine. Every Hindu in the world must believe that we are not this physical body, we are not even the mind. We are eternal souls, atmas, separate from the body-mind complex. And that Atman is intimately connected to the infinite divine. This is the second doctrine of this spiritual Hinduism. That's why Swami Medhananda used to teach. He came to the West, a country full of Christians at the time. And Christianity, of course, believes in original sin. He says, it is a standing libel upon human nature to call a human being a sinner. We're divinities walking on earth. Children of immortal bliss. Amritasya putra. Third principle. What's the goal of life? The goal of life is to attain liberation from suffering by realizing any aspect or form of that infinite divine and how we relate to that infinite divine reality. The goal of life, the ultimate goal of life, is to realize some aspect or form of that infinite divine reality, that divine truth. Now, you might think, well, this is why people say that Hinduism is a mystical, otherworldly, life-denying kind of religion. But no, if you look at the original scriptures, you're going to find that Hinduism makes room for 4 fundamental values in human life. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. These are the 4 purusharthas. 4 fundamental values in human life. The last one is moksha, liberation. But there are other 3. It's the highest. Moksha is the highest. But we also have dharma, ethical living. Unselfish behavior. Artha, material possessions, acquisitions, accumulation of wealth. Kama, fulfillment of your legitimate worldly desires. That's also within Hinduism. That's part of it. But what every Hindu must understand is that these other 3 values are subordinated to the highest goal of moksha. They're means to the end of moksha. You should never treat even dharma or artha or kama as ends in themselves. They are all means to the end of the ultimate and highest goal of moksha. And I'll give you an example. Again, some of you were actually present at this incident long back. My sister got married in 2008, something like that, and the wedding was held in Malibu. And the Hindu priest was actually a white American. And to his credit, one thing I really like about him is that he sent out a sheet explaining every ritual in the Hindu wedding ceremony ahead of time. And I read through it. This is just before I became a monk. I was very interested. They have this ritual called Kashi Yatra. Many of you know that. Pilgrimage to Kashi, to Varanasi. What does it mean? The priest will ask the groom, are you sure you want to go through with this and marry this lady? Or do you want to drop this, become a monk, run off to Varanasi, and realize the highest goal of life, which is moksha? Why would we include this kind of ritual in the Hindu wedding ceremony? Does anybody actually follow through on this? No. Or maybe one person has, I have no idea. Most people don't. But it's a ritual. But the idea is, it's drilled into the heads of these soon-to-be newlyweds. Don't think that marriage is the be-all, end-all, enjoyment is the best. No. No. You are marrying this person as your spiritual partner. You are both on a spiritual journey together. That's why Sri Ramakrishna used to say to householders, after having 1 or 2 children, try to live with their spouse like brother and sister. What does it mean? It means that the marriage needs to evolve. If it doesn't evolve, you will never attain the highest goal of life. That's Hinduism. 4th principle. Now we come to spiritual practice. So the 4th principle is, there are countless paths to this highest goal of life, which is liberation by realizing the divine. There are countless paths, any number of paths. Vedanta generalizes these paths into 4 main paths. And Satya Sai Baba also talks about these 4 paths. Swami Medhananda talked about them a lot. So you probably already know, but I'll mention them very briefly. Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion toward the personal God. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. Karma Yoga, the path of selfless action, doing anything you're doing, raising kids, going to work, but doing it as an offering to the divine. This is the main practice taught in the Bhagavad Gita. And Raja Yoga, the path of meditation and concentration. You'll find it in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You'll find it in chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, for instance. What is the aim of all of these yogas? And how is it that they can take us to the highest goal? Remember, One of the reasons I put Shankara's Advaita Vedanta in the sectarian camp is he puts one of these yogas above all the others. He puts the Jnana Yoga above the other three yogas. I can practice Karma Yoga for many, many lifetimes, I still won't get liberation, I won't get Brahma Jnana, according to Shankaracharya. But Bhagavad Gita, look at Bhagavad Gita, without commentaries. Chapter 3. Karmaneva hi samsiddhim asita janakadeha. Loka sangarmevapi sampashyan kattumahasi. Through karma alone, King Janaka and others attained perfection. And I remember, I had the great fortune, the good fortune of having Sarvapriyananji as one of my acharyas, my teachers for 2 years in training center in Beluma, long back, 2013 to 15. And he was teaching the Bhagavad Gita, and we came to this verse. And he dutifully explained this Advaitic understanding of the verse, which is that Janaka, he did his Karma Yoga, but then he had to finally practice the path of knowledge, and then he got liberation. I said, this sounds like it's text torturing, Maharaj. Don't you think the verse is saying, didn't Swami Vivekananda himself say that through Karma Yoga alone you can attain the highest goal? And so we had these kinds of friendly debates once in a while. Anyway, so that's still my position. If you go to the original scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, even the Brahma Sutra, what you're going to find is there's no narrowness and sectarianism there. They're not putting one yoga above the other yogas. That happens with the sectarian commentators. Okay, but decide for yourselves. Read the scriptures with an unbiased mind and try to do that yourself and see what it really teaches. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Tini ananto patho ananto. Because the divine is infinite, therefore the paths to the divine are equally infinite. What a beautiful teaching, and how simple it is. That's why I called my book on Sri Ramakrishna, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. And that became the epigraph to my book, Tini ananto patho ananto. It explains why there are infinite paths to God. Why are there infinite paths? Because God himself is infinite. You can't even say God himself. God is also her. God is she, he, they, it, everything. It's wonderful. Wonderfully woke. So these are the 4 core principles of non-sectarian spiritual Hinduism, okay? And you should memorize these. And then you'll be able to assimilate them, try to practice them in your own life, and then try to explain them to the next generation. This is our duty as Hindus, actually. We're not doing a very good job in general. I'm not just picking on NRIs in India. I'm saying here in the US, everywhere in the world, even in India. Are we doing a better job of explaining Hinduism in India? I don't think so. It's equally mechanical and this and that. Every Hindu parent has a responsibility to teach Hinduism, the spiritual principles of Hinduism, in the right way, in a powerful way, to children who are very smart, very observant, always questioning, thinking critically. How do you explain Hinduism in a way that doesn't seem like it's just forcing them to swallow all sorts of weird ideas? This is the challenge for each one of you. Okay, so to summarize, first, there's one infinite, impersonal, personal divine reality which manifests in countless forms. This is the doctrine of polymorphic monism. And the doctrine of Ishta Devata comes from this first principle. Second principle, we suffer. If you look at any time you've suffered in your entire life, it's because we identify with the body-mind complex. Either there's suffering at the level of the body, some kind of a physical health issue or something else, somebody hits you, you're in pain, or something at the level of the mind. You're suffering some form of mental agony, suffering, torture, anguish. You lose a loved one and you're suffering miserable. But now, even if there's suffering at the level of body, even if there's suffering at the level of mind, if you can break your identification with the body-mind, you won't feel that suffering. You'll realize that in your deepest essence, you are perfectly blissful and free. That you're completely untouched by the suffering at the level of the body-mind complex. This is the second doctrine, the core doctrine of spiritual Hinduism. Third doctrine, the goal of life is to realize that infinite divine in any form or aspect. Okay? And then 4, there are infinite paths to realizing the infinite divine. Okay? And then, more important than anything, it's one thing to memorize these things, another thing to practice them. As Hindus, the most important thing is practice. An ounce of practice is worth more than 10 pounds of theory. I give you the theory, now you have to put it in practice on a day-to-day basis. Implement the principles. That's the most important. You have to live Hinduism and not just talk about Hinduism and understand Hinduism intellectually. Okay. I wanted to mention, I gave an earlier version of this talk a few months ago in our Ramakrishna Monastery in Trabuco Canyon. And in the YouTube comments, there were some spirited comments, and one of them was from a white American who said, "I've always felt weird calling myself a Hindu since I'm white. Usually I just say I'm a devotee of Ramakrishna. But if it's all right to say I'm a Hindu, I definitely will from now on." It's a very interesting comment, and it's a very telling comment, a revealing comment. Why? Because we all know that you can be an African Muslim and an American Muslim and an Afghanistani Muslim, Afghani Muslim. But to say you're an American Hindu or a British Hindu, if you're white, if you're not Indian, somehow for a lot of people there's a cognitive dissonance. They have trouble accepting it. Somehow in a lot of people's minds there is a misunderstanding that Hinduism is fundamentally an ethnic religion, that it's circumscribed by the country of India. That's why Sri Aurobindo said spiritual Hinduism is not circumscribed by Hindustan, which means India. You can be a Hindu living in any country in the world. You don't need to be living in India. You don't have to have brown skin to count yourself as Hindu, right? And people have no problem saying I'm a Buddhist or a Christian or a Muslim. That's not ethnic. Those religions are not considered ethnic. Even Buddhism, see? But Hinduism, the moment you say Hinduism, like Judaism, it becomes ethnic. This is wrong. This is because this is a misunderstanding of what Hinduism really is. Spiritual Hinduism explodes any kind of ethnic or sectarian boundaries. You can belong to any country, any culture, and you can still call yourself Hindu. The only requirement is to accept these four fundamental principles. If you accept these four principles, who cares what country you're from, what culture you're in, what ethnicity you belong to? You are a Hindu in the relevant sense. Now, I want to mention, after mentioning these four core principles, I wanted to mention that there are two additional principles which I would put in the category of what I call Hinduism plus. Hinduism plus, okay? So I've already explained Hinduism as such, the four main principles. Now I'm going to add two more doctrines which fall into Hinduism plus. I call it plus because these are not mandatory. It's not mandatory to believe these two extra doctrines, but they can help you, and you're going to find them throughout the Hindu scriptures. So, doctrine number 5. So this is the first doctrine of Hinduism plus. This is, you can probably guess, and it's a perfect plug for my book, Karma and Rebirth. So after the Q&A, we'll have a book signing. That's the new book that I published called Karma and Rebirth in Hinduism. Why do I say these doctrines are optional? These are not mandatory. Well, because I've seen this. There are some Hindus I've come across who feel somehow uneasy about accepting these doctrines. And they ask me about it. And is it really rational? It sounds kind of funny. And like, how do we know that? They have all sorts of questions. Now I can say, read my book. It's the easiest thing to do. But many people have these doubts, right? Does it mean that they're not Hindus until they accept the doctrines? No, you don't need to. In fact, M, the author of Kathamrita, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, asked Sri Ramakrishna one day. He said, is it okay that I don't believe in karma and rebirth? He said, yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it. But never for a moment say, my view alone is right, everybody else is wrong. Be open-minded. And you know what happened? After some time, M accepted everything. He accepted karma and rebirth. But see how broad his guru was. It's not mandatory. So that's why I put it in as the first doctrine of Hinduism plus. Even if you accept the first four doctrines and don't accept karma and rebirth, you're still Hindu. Okay. Now, second doctrine. This is very controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. The doctrine of Varna, okay, which is often translated as caste. This is not the hereditary caste system. You cannot be born as a Brahmin or a Kshatriya just because your father is a Brahmin and so on and so forth. That's not what I mean by caste. So let's call it Varna so that there's no confusion. The doctrine of Varna, in its original sense, not in its hereditary sense. What do I mean by that? Well, Bhagavad Gita says very clearly, I already said it. Bhagavan Krishna explains the four Varnas in terms of guna and karma. Guna and karma, innate qualities and your behavior. And he divides the four categories, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Okay? Now, let's look at some of the scriptures. Mahabharata says, not birth, not initiation, not Veda knowledge, not even lineage cause a person to be twice born, meaning belonging to the three upper castes. The only cause is behavior. This is a direct quotation from the Mahabharata, denying that Varna should be understood in hereditary terms. I'll give you another example from the Mahabharata. Truth, generosity, patience, good conduct, harmlessness, austerity, compassion. Where these are found, that person is said to be a Brahmana. Notice what's being said. These are ethical and spiritual qualities. If you have them, I don't care who your father or mother is. You're a Brahman. And if you're a hereditary Brahman and you are missing these qualities, you're not really a Brahman in the real sense, in the true sense. Okay, so both things are true. So why do I emphasize this at all? Why make this part of Hinduism plus? Because I think it's a very helpful doctrine. If you understand Varna properly, in terms of guna and karma, it can really help us to carve out our path in life, to navigate this difficult world. How? In every college, you'll find, at least when I was in college, they had these things. They called them career counselors. I don't know these days. Maybe they'll use ChatGPT now for that. But there was an actual human being, and you would go to them, and they'd ask you. You might fill out a questionnaire. What are you good at? What do you like doing? This and that. And then they're experts, they're professionals, and they'll suggest some career options for you. This is the real idea of swadharma in the Bhagavad Gita, actually. Each one of us has a unique law of being, our own law of being. And understanding our varna in the original sense, not in a hereditary way, but what are our strengths and weaknesses? What is our temperament? What are our preferences? What are our leanings? We can identify our swadharma, our own law of being, and we can find a calling, a vocation that can help us to cultivate those strengths on a daily basis. And if you know anything about positive psychology, you might have heard of, he's considered to be the father of positive psychology. His name is Martin Seligman. I think he might be retired now. He was a professor at University of Pennsylvania. And he wrote a book in 2002 or something called Authentic Happiness. And his recipe for happiness has two main steps. Number one, identify your signature strengths. He calls them signature strengths. What are you best at? Identify them first. And it's not always easy. It might take the help of a career counselor, a loved one, your child, somebody to help you. Hey, mom, you're actually really good at this, or so and so. Number one, identify your signature strengths. Number two, find a calling, find a vocation that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths on a regular basis. That's it. That's the recipe to true happiness. Vedanta will add a third step. Vedanta will say to Martin Seligman and these other Western positive psychologists, not so fast. There's one more step. It's not enough to find out what your strengths are and to find a calling that will help you to cultivate those strengths. You have to convert your work into karma yoga. You have to convert your karma into karma yoga. And how do you do that? You have to remove any selfish motives from your actions. This is the third crucial step to true happiness, according to Vedanta. I think it's missing in most Western positive psychology. So that's where we can learn something tremendous from Vedanta, scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita. Okay. So, finally, I want to conclude by asking, how is any of this relevant to us as spiritual aspirants? It's one thing to understand them theoretically, and also I hope that you'll be able to explain Hinduism in a nice, powerful, succinct way, in a rational way to your children also, right? Or if there's Chinmay Mission has Bala Vihara, and the Sai Foundation also has children's programs. So it's very important that we portray Hinduism in a powerful and compelling way, that even a child can understand. That's every Hindu has that responsibility. But now, how is it relevant to us as day-to-day spiritual aspirants? I just want to mention a few things. Number one, first of all, let's not be ashamed to call ourselves Hindu. This is a trend now, but it's not a good trend. We should be proud Hindus. I am not in any way political. I'm neither left-wing nor am I right-wing. I'm a monk. Monks are apolitical, but I'm a proud Hindu. One can and should be a proud Hindu without being labeled as a right-wing or a left-wing or this or that nonsense. So be a proud Hindu, but understand what being Hindu really means. Fundamentally, it boils down to these four principles. And if you believe them, you're a Hindu. And there's nothing wrong about that, nothing to do with the 3 Ps or the 3 Cs, casteism or anything like that. Okay. Another thing, very, very important. And you should educate people who don't know this, who have wrong understandings about Hinduism. Hinduism is not an ethnic religion. Of course, it originated in India, but India does not have a monopoly on it. And it doesn't mean that only people who are born in India are Hindu. This is a wrong idea. Hinduism is not an ethnic religion. The beauty of Hinduism is that it's a non-proselytizing and non-ethnic religion. It's universal because, see, Christianity, Islam, these are proselytizing religions. I was at USC a few years ago, sitting on a bench, and I was approached by these Christian students, and they gave me a brochure, and they said, well, have you heard the saving message of Christ? And I said, yes, I've read the Bible. And we had this, they didn't expect me to have known the Bible. They were ready to convert me. It didn't work out very well. Another incident, I'm a swimmer, and so I was swimming one day. I have a gym membership, so I was swimming. And then after my workout, this elderly Asian lady was next to me in the pool. And she says, are you Christian? Or no, what religion are you? I said, I'm Hindu. She goes, better to be Christian. so anyway, not all Christians are like that, not all Muslims, but there's a proselytizing impulse. There's an impulse to convert in some of these world religions. Hinduism is completely devoid of that. In fact, back in Swamiji's time, Monier Williams, he was a Sanskrit professor at Oxford University. He was also a very fundamentalist Christian. So his aim was to convert Hindus to Christianity. So he went to India. And what he saw was amazing. He saw when these Christian missionaries came to Hindus and said, you should accept our Christ. Hindus said, we love your Christ. And the missionaries were very happy. They said, we've converted them. And the Hindus said, no, but we're still Hindu. And we still love our Kali and our Ganesha and our Rama, our Krishna. That's the beauty of Hinduism. We can fully embrace Christ. We can go to church with the Christians. We can go to mosques with the Muslims. We can go to the Buddhist mindfulness retreats. But as Vedantins, we don't have to step 1 inch out of our own Hindu identity by doing that. So Hinduism is non-ethnic and at the same time non-proselytizing. Whereas other religions, if they're non-ethnic, they tend to be proselytizing. And they have this impulse they want to make the whole world in their own image. Hindus shouldn't feel that way. Let's pray that the Christian becomes a better Christian. There's another beautiful incident about this. Puri Jagannath Mandir, one of my favorite temples in India. This is long back in the 1900s, early 1900s. Premanandaji, one of the monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, was outside the temple, and there was a Christian missionary loudly shouting, you have to accept Christ, otherwise you're going to hell, and this kind of thing, just kind of Christian kind of proselytizing, very loudly. And there was a group of Hindus who were taking Hari's name. And the Christian missionary got louder and louder to drown out the voice of these Hindus. Then Premanandaji got a little bit upset about this, that in front of Jagannath Mandir, and he's also saying that Hindus are going to hell and this and that, putting down Hinduism and Hindus. So he became a little agitated. And he got this big group of Hindus together and said, let's take Hari's name together, let's be loud, let's chant it loudly. They chanted it so loudly that they drowned out this Christian missionary shouting, and he ended up getting kind of flustered and he left. Now, what's really interesting, Premanandaji goes home, he thinks he's done a good deed, defending his religion. In a dream that night, Sri Ramakrishna appears to him and scolds him. And he says, why did you do this? That Christian missionary was preaching me. Look at the beauty of this. Sri Ramakrishna is scolding Premanandaji and saying that Christian missionary, putting down Hindus and saying you should accept Christ. He was teaching me. He was preaching me. Go back and apologize to the Christian missionary. The next morning, Premanandaji wakes up, goes all over the place trying to locate this Christian missionary and apologizes, begs his apology. And just imagine the state of the Christian missionary. So this is Hinduism. This is the greatness of Hinduism as a non-ethnic, universal, non-proselytizing religion. Okay? We should be very proud of that and proud to call ourselves Hindu. And another thing, which is so wonderful about our religion, Hinduism, unlike many other religions, it's not a one-size-fits-all religion. You see, every single person in this room may be a Hindu, and yet each of us is Hindu in his or her own unique way. Swami Medhananda used to say, no person is born into a religion. Each person has a religion, a unique religion in the depths of his or her soul. So the first step in spiritual life is, let me try to identify what is that unique religion in the depths of my soul. That's why in a typical Hindu household, mother will be a Ganesha worshiper, father will be a Advaita Vedanta, the son will be a Kali worshiper. Everybody's a good Hindu, right? There's no one-size-fits-all kind of concept in Hinduism. Each one of us should come up with the best religion, and we're all Hindus, but we can synthesize the 4 yogas in a way that best suits us and our temperament, right? In my own practice, I love sacred classical music. That's like bhajans on the Indian side, but also on the Western classical music side. It's called sacred classical music. There's a lot of Christian classical music by the great composers. I listen to a lot of that. That's part of my spiritual practice. Buddhist mindfulness, vipassana, that's another part of my spiritual practice. But as a Hindu, you don't have to abandon your religion in order to, and you don't have to be what I call a spiritual dilettante, just dabbling here and there. No, you're firmly grounded in your own Hindu faith, and you can freely learn from and draw upon and incorporate aspects of other religions into your own faith. That's the beauty of Hinduism. So finally, I wanted to end by mentioning one more time, it's not enough to be Hindu. It's not enough to be Hindu. By accepting the 4 core principles of Hinduism, we are Hindus, but that's not enough. We have to live Hinduism. We have to put Hinduism into practice by loving all and serving all.